The desert road stretched far into the horizon, a thin line between two endless seas of golden sand. The wind blew softly, carrying the dry taste of dust, and the sun hung low, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, a slow-moving alien. Merchant Wagon rolled along the road, its wheels creaking, pulled by two massive lizard-like creatures with thick hides and glowing eyes. The wagon was loaded with strange crates stacked high, some made of metal, some of glowing crystal, all tied down with thick ropes. Inside each crate were goods from faraway worlds, items worth more than a small village could earn in a year. Among these crates was one that looked different. It was round, smooth, and silver. With strange markings on its surface, it gave off a faint blue glow, and every few seconds, it made a soft humming sound. The crate was balanced on the very edge of the wagon side. Shaking slightly with every bump in the road, the merchant, a tall alien with 4 arms and a long face, didn't seem to notice. He was busy talking to his guard, laughing about a good sale he had made earlier that day, far behind the wagon. A lone human named Evan was walking along the dusty road. He had been traveling for hours, his boots heavy with sand, his water flask almost empty. Evan was no stranger to deserts, but this one felt different. The air was heavy, the sky seemed larger, and the silence was deep enough to make his own footsteps sound loud. He saw the wagon far ahead, moving slowly, and thought about catching up to ask for a ride. Then it happened. The wagon hit a deep hole in the road, and the round silver crate rolled to the side. It tilted, bounced once on the wagon's edge, and then fell. It hit the ground with a heavy thud, sending up a cloud of dust. The merchant didn't hear it, or didn't care, and the wagon kept moving forward. Evan stopped, watching as the dust cleared, and saw the strange crate lying in the sand. Curiosity pushed him forward. He walked to the crate, noticing the strange humming was now louder. The blue glow pulsed like the beat of a heart. The markings on its surface seemed to shift, almost like they were alive. Evan knelt down and brushed the sand away, revealing a small panel on the side. Before he could touch it, the crate hissed, releasing a burst of cold mist. The top slowly opened, the glow spilling out brighter than before. Inside was a capsule, smooth and transparent, shaped like an egg. The capsule's surface was covered with faint cracks from the fall, and inside it was a girl. Her skin was pale with a slight silver shimmer, her hair long and glowing faintly in the sunlight. Her eyes were closed, and she was breathing slowly. As if asleep, she wore strange clothing made of thin, shining fabric that looked far too delicate for the desert. For a moment, Evan just stared, unsure if he was looking at a dream or something real. A sudden sharp sound snapped him out of it, a steady beeping coming from the capsule. It was quiet at first, then faster. Evan's instincts told him it was a warning. He didn't know if it meant danger for her, for him, or for both of them. The capsule gave another hiss, and the cracks widened. The girl's fingers twitched. Her lips moved slightly as if she was speaking in her sleep. Evan hesitated, looking down the road. The wagon was far now, just a small dot in the distance. If he ran to call them, it would be too late. The beeping grew faster, almost urgent. He had no tools, no idea how this alien technology worked. But he couldn't just stand there and do nothing, acting on instinct. Evan placed his hands on the capsule's side and tried to pull it open. It didn't move. The beeping turned into a high-pitched whine that made his ears ache. He pressed harder, feeling the heat building under his hands. With a loud crack, the capsule split apart, cold mist poured out, and the girl's eyes flew open. Her eyes were not like any he had seen, deep, glowing, and shifting between colors. She gasped and sat up, looking around wildly when she saw Evan. She froze, her eyes narrowing. She spoke quickly in a language he didn't understand, her voice sharp and urgent. She glanced over his shoulder toward the horizon, her face filled with sudden fear. Evan turned to look, and his stomach tightened. A shadow was moving across the sand, something large and fast. It rose and fell like a wave, getting closer with each second. The girl grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the nearby hills. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her voice filled with desperation as she spoke again in that strange tongue. Evan didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. They had to run. The shadow grew larger, the ground trembling under their feet. Whatever was coming, it was not friendly. The desert wind carried a low, rumbling sound, like the growl of a predator. Evan tightened his grip on her hand, his mind racing. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into, but he knew one thing. If they didn't move fast, they wouldn't survive the next few minutes. The girl's hand was cold but strong, pulling Evan with surprising force across the sand. Her feet barely touched the ground as she moved, as if she was lighter than she looked. Evan's boots sank into the soft dunes, slowing him down. But the girl didn't let go. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her glowing eyes wide with panic. Behind them, the shadow on the horizon grew sharper. It was no longer just a blur. The shape of a large creature began to form. 6 long legs moved like blades cutting through the sand, and its head was narrow, with 2 curved horns pointing forward. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and a low hiss carried through the wind. Evan's heart pounded. He had faced dangerous animals before, but nothing like this. The way it moved was wrong, too fast, too smooth, as if it was floating above the ground. The girl shouted something, her voice trembling but urgent. Evan didn't understand the words, but he caught the tone. This thing was hunting them. They reached a patch of harder ground where the sand turned into cracked, dry soil. The girl finally let go of his hand, turning to face the direction they were heading. Evan looked ahead and saw an old, abandoned structure on a low hill. It was a watchtower, tall but leaning slightly to one side. The stone was worn down and half the roof had collapsed. Still, it was shelter, better than running blind in the open. The girl motioned for him to follow, then sprinted toward it. Evan forced his tired legs to move faster, each step kicking up dust behind him. The hissing turned into a shriek that rattled his bones. He didn't need to look to know the creature was closer. The sound of its legs striking the ground was like the crack of whips. They reached the base of the tower. The girl pushed at the heavy wooden door, but it barely moved. Evan threw his shoulder against it, and the old hinges groaned. It swung open just enough for them to slip inside. Evan slammed it shut, leaning against it as dust fell from the frame. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of old stone and rust. Light came in through narrow slits in the wall, enough for him to see broken furniture and scattered bones on the floor. The girl pressed her back against the door too, breathing hard, her chest rising and falling quickly. Outside, the creature circled the tower, its shadow sliding across the slits of light. Evan could hear its claws scraping the stone. Searching for a way in, the girl slowly stepped away from the door and walked toward the far wall. She reached into a hidden pocket in her clothing and pulled out a small crystal. It glowed softly, casting a pale blue light across her silver skin. She pressed it to her chest, and the faint cuts on her arms began to close before his eyes. Evan stared, amazed. This was not technology he had ever seen. The girl noticed his look and quickly hid the crystal again. He took a slow breath, keeping his voice calm. "Who are you?" he asked. The girl tilted her head, not understanding. Then she spoke a single word in broken English. "Run. Far." Her voice was soft, but the fear in it was sharp. Before Evan could say more, a loud thud shook the walls. The creature had slammed into the tower, making dust rain from the ceiling. The girl's eyes darted to the door, then to one of the small windows. She whispered something quickly under her breath, clutching the crystal through her clothing. A new sound joined the hissing. Voices, deep, rough voices speaking in the same language as the girl. Evan peered through one of the slits and froze. Several figures in dark armor were walking across the sand toward the tower. They carried long rifles, and their armor gleamed under the fading sunlight. One of them shouted something, and the creature backed away, as if obeying a command. The girl stepped closer to Evan, her hand gripping his sleeve tightly. Her fear seemed even greater now than when the creature was chasing them. The voices outside grew clearer. One man stepped forward and called out in English, his tone cold. "Human, open the door. Give us the girl, and you will live." Evan glanced at her. Her eyes were shaking, her head moving quickly in a clear no. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew giving her up wasn't an option. He backed away from the window, looking around for another way out. The tower's interior was crumbling, but maybe. There was a staircase. In the corner, half covered by rubble, he spotted a trapdoor. The girl noticed it too and pulled his arm. Another loud bang hit the door. The men were trying to break it down. Evan ran to the trapdoor, kicking away the debris. It was old, the wood splintered, but still intact. He pulled it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. A faint smell of damp air rose up from below. The girl didn't hesitate. She slipped into the opening and waited for him. Evan followed, pulling the trapdoor shut above them. They moved quickly down the steps, their footsteps echoing. The light from above faded, replaced by the faint glow of the girl's crystal. The air grew cooler. The sound of the men upstairs muffled, but still there. Evan didn't know where these stairs led. He only knew that whatever lay ahead, it had to be safer than staying above. And yet, as the darkness swallowed them, a strange thought came to him. Maybe he had just stepped into something far more dangerous than he realized. The girl's glowing eyes glanced back at him once, and in that moment, Evan understood. Her fear wasn't only for herself, it was for him too. The narrow staircase twisted downward. The stone steps cracked from age. Evan's hand brushed the damp walls as they moved, the girl's crystal casting just enough light to guide their way. Every sound felt louder in the underground tunnel. The scrape of his boots, the girl's quick breathing, the distant thuds of boots above them. The men in armor were searching the tower, their voices muffled through the stone. Evan didn't trust that the stairs would keep them hidden for long. The girl seemed to know where she was going, moving quickly despite the uneven floor. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim blue light, giving her an almost ghost-like presence in the darkness. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber. In the center, a section of the floor had collapsed, revealing sand below. Through the opening, Evan could see faint moonlight shining down from a crack in the surface above. The girl pointed at it, speaking in her language, her tone urgent. Evan understood enough. It was a way out. He crouched down, lowering himself into the sand. It was cooler here, the grains soft and fine between his fingers. The girl landed beside him without a sound, moving toward the light as they climbed. Toward the opening, a sharp, distant roar echoed through the night. It was the same sound Evan had heard before, the predator's cry. The girl froze, her body tense. Evan's mind raced. Had the creature followed them underground? No, the sound came from outside, carried by the wind. They reached the surface, emerging from a narrow crack at the base of a dune. The open desert stretched in every direction, the sky now dark with a full moon hanging high. The wind blew harder. Here, carrying the scent of something metallic and sharp, the girl touched his arm, pointing toward the west where jagged hills rose like the teeth of a giant beast. It was their next destination, he guessed. More shelter, more cover. But before they could move, the sand ahead rippled. At first it looked like the wind shifting the dunes, then the ground bulged upward and split apart. The sand poured away to reveal a massive head, pale and bone-like, with hollow black eyes that reflected no light. 6 legs unfolded from its body, long and jointed, moving with unnatural speed. It was the hunter, the one the girl had called Sereth. Evan's stomach dropped. The creature hissed, its teeth snapping together with a sound like breaking glass. The girl grabbed his hand and pulled him into a run. They dashed across the sand, their feet sinking with every step. The hunter's legs struck the ground in quick, stabbing motions, propelling it forward faster than anything Evan had seen. Each impact sent a vibration through the ground. The girl shouted something, her voice high with urgency. Evan glanced back. The beast was gaining on them, its jaws opening wider, up ahead. Half buried in the sand was an old metal structure, a collapsed outpost, its roof broken, but its walls still standing. Evan pointed toward it, and the girl nodded. They sprinted for the entrance, the sound of the hunter's legs hammering behind them. The opening was just large enough to squeeze through. Evan dove inside first, the girl following right after. The creature slammed into the wall, shaking the whole structure. Sand rained down from the ceiling, and the girl stumbled into Evan's arms. For a moment, they stayed still, listening to the hiss and scrape of claws outside. The hunter began circling the outpost, its shadow sliding over the holes in the walls. Evan searched the inside. Broken crates, shattered glass, an overturned table in the corner. He spotted a long metal rod, heavy but balanced enough to swing. He picked it up, gripping it tightly. The girl shook her head quickly, pointing instead to the roof. Evan looked up. There was a narrow hole, big enough for them to climb through. But the roof was cracked and unstable. Another slam from the hunter made the decision for them. The wall closest to the door split open. They scrambled toward the roof hole, Evan boosting the girl up first. She moved quickly, her hands finding secure holds despite the crumbling edges. Evan followed, his muscles burning from the effort. Below them, the hunter's head pushed through the broken wall, its jaws snapping shut with a loud crack. They reached the top and slid down the far side of the structure, landing hard in the sand. The girl didn't stop. She took off toward the jagged hills. Evan followed, his breaths coming fast and harsh. Behind them, the hunter let out a scream so loud it made the air vibrate. The dunes gave way to rocky ground, making their steps surer. But the hunter wasn't slowing. Its legs struck against stone now, sending sparks into the night. Evan's mind was a storm of thoughts. How to fight it, how to lose it, how to keep the girl alive. Up ahead, a narrow canyon split the hills, dark and tight. The girl ran for it, and Evan realized her plan. The hunter's size might work against it there. They dove into the canyon just as the hunter reached the entrance. Its legs scraped against the stone walls, slowing it down. Evan and the girl pushed deeper into the shadows, their footsteps echoing. The roar of the hunter faded slightly. They rounded a bend and found a small hidden alcove, shielded by fallen rocks. The girl sank to the ground, clutching her crystal to her chest, her breathing ragged. Evan leaned against the wall, his muscles trembling. For the first time since the chase began, there was silence. The girl looked at him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She spoke softly, her voice carrying a weight he couldn't ignore. Not safe. Not yet. The night air inside the canyon was cool, carrying the faint scent of stone and dust. Evan listened closely, his back pressed against the wall, trying to hear any movement from the creature outside. But for now, there was only silence, the kind that made every small sound feel louder. The girl's crystal still glowed faintly, its blue light reflecting in her silver-toned skin. Her breathing was slowing, but her eyes remained alert, scanning the shadows as if expecting danger to step out at any moment. Evan crouched beside her. "You okay?" he asked softly, knowing she might not understand, but hoping his tone would carry the meaning. She met his eyes and gave a small nod, though her hand still clutched the crystal tightly. It was clear the object was more than just a light. It was important to her, maybe even keeping her alive. She whispered a word, slow and careful. "Safe, for now." Evan almost smiled. It was the first time she had spoken more than a few words to him in English. They stayed hidden for several minutes. Then the girl pointed deeper into the canyon, her expression serious. She said another word he didn't know, but her tone made it clear. They needed to move. Evan nodded and stood, offering his hand to help her up. They moved through the canyon's twisting path until it opened into a small plateau. In the center stood an ancient watchtower, its Stone walls cracked and covered in moss. It was taller than the one they had seen before, and despite the damage, it still looked solid. A single narrow bridge of stone connected it to the canyon wall. The girl stepped onto the bridge without hesitation, her bare feet silent on the rock. Evan followed carefully. Glancing down at the drop below, it was deep enough that a fall would mean the end. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of distant voices. Evan turned his head. Far away, at the canyon's entrance, tiny lights moved in the darkness. Whoever those men were from before, they were still hunting. He hurried after the girl, reaching the tower's heavy wooden door. She pushed it open with surprising strength, revealing a dim interior lit only by the moon through broken windows. Inside, the air was cooler. Dust floated in the shafts of light, and the floor was littered with old tools, broken furniture, and scattered papers. The girl walked straight to the center of the room where a large stone table stood. On its surface was a map carved directly into the rock. It showed the surrounding desert, with strange markings and glowing dots that pulsed faintly like stars. Evan stepped closer, running his fingers over the lines. They weren't just markings. They were roots. The girl placed her crystal on the center of the map, and the glowing dots began to shift. One of them pulsed brightly, the same direction they had come from. Evan frowned. "That's where we found your capsule," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. The girl nodded slowly, then tapped another point far to the east. Her expression tightened as she looked at him. "Safe place," she said in broken English. "Need to go." Before Evan could reply, a sharp sound echoed from outside, the clink of metal against stone. The girl grabbed the crystal from the table and shoved it back into her clothes. They both moved to one of the windows and peeked out. Figures in dark armor were crossing the bridge, the same men from before, their rifles slung across their backs, their eyes scanning the tower. One of them raised a hand, and the group stopped. Another sound came from below, a hiss, low and long. Evan's chest tightened. The hunter creature was back, its shadow shifting in the moonlight near the canyon floor. The men didn't seem afraid of it, which made him uneasy. The girl stepped back from the window, her face pale. "Merchantmen," she whispered, "and Sereth." Together, Evan felt his stomach drop. If the creature and the armed men were working together, it meant this wasn't just bad luck. It was a trap. The girl moved quickly to the far wall where a wooden ladder led to the tower's upper floor. She gestured for him to follow, and they climbed silently, the wood creaking under their weight. The second floor was narrower but had wide slits in the walls for archers long ago. From here, Evan could see the entire bridge and the canyon beyond. The men were halfway across now, their movements careful. The hunter paced below, its head turning slowly as if it could smell them. Evan looked around for anything to defend themselves. Near the wall, he found an old crossbow, dusty but intact. He picked it up, testing the string. It was weak but still usable. The girl knelt beside a locked chest and pried it open with a rusty tool. Inside were small metal spheres, each with strange markings. She held one up, meeting his eyes with a sharp look. "Throw." "Big noise," she said simply. Evan understood. A distraction. The footsteps outside grew louder. Evan loaded the crossbow while the girl took two of the spheres. The first armored man stepped into view through the slit. Evan didn't aim to kill. Instead, he fired at the stone just above the bridge. The arrow struck, sending a loud crack echoing through the canyon. The girl immediately rolled one of the spheres off the edge. It hit the canyon floor and exploded with a flash of white light and a deafening boom. The hunter screeched, leaping back from the noise. The men staggered, covering their eyes. The girl grabbed Evan's arm and pulled him toward a trapdoor in the corner. It led to a narrow hidden passage spiraling down inside the tower's wall. They moved quickly, the sound of confusion above giving them precious seconds. When they reached the bottom, the passage opened to a hidden exit at the canyon's far side. The cool night air hit them, and they ran, leaving the tower behind. Evan didn't look back, but the girl did, and the fear in her eyes only grew. The narrow exit spilled them into the open desert. The cool night wind whipped across Evan's face, carrying the smell of dry earth and old stone. The girl didn't pause. She pulled him along, her glowing eyes fixed on the distant dunes. Behind them, the watchtower stood like a dark shadow against the moonlit sky. Shouts echoed faintly, mixed with the distant hiss of the hunter creature. It wouldn't be long before the men realized where they had gone. They ran until the ground sloped downward into a dry riverbed. The sand here was firmer, easier to cross, and the tall canyon walls gave them some cover from view. Evan's breathing was heavy, but he didn't slow. Every step away from the watchtower felt like a step away from death. The girl glanced over her shoulder now and then, scanning the darkness behind them. Her hand still clutched the crystal inside her clothing. It was as if letting go of it for even a second would mean losing something more than her life. When they finally stopped to rest, Evan leaned against the canyon wall. "All right. You have to tell me what's going on," he said, his voice low but firm. The girl's expression tightened, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. She spoke slowly, her broken English clear enough for him to understand. "Merchant. Bad man. Sell me," she said, pointing back in the direction they had come from. Evan's stomach twisted. He had suspected she was in trouble, but hearing it confirmed was different. "Sell you? To who?" he asked. Her gaze shifted downward. "Far place. Not come back." Evan clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a case of someone being chased. This was slavery, and the merchant was willing to use armed men and a deadly beast to keep her from escaping. The girl took a deep breath and continued. "Capsule. Hide me until city," she said, pointing to the sky as if imagining some faraway place. Evan realized the capsule wasn't a prison. It was her hiding place, maybe even her only chance to survive the journey. But something had gone wrong. The fall from the wagon had saved her and dragged him into the mess. Suddenly, the faint crunch of footsteps echoed through the canyon. The girl's head snapped up, her body tense. Evan motioned for her to move behind him, gripping a loose stone from the ground. Shadows emerged from around a bend. 3 of the merchant's men, their dark armor catching the moonlight. They weren't running. They walked with the confidence of hunters who knew their prey couldn't escape. The lead man, taller than the rest, raised a hand. "Human," he called, his voice deep and steady. "This is not your fight. Hand her over and you can leave." Evan didn't move. The man's tone shifted slightly, almost persuasive. "She is not what you think. Dangerous, unstable. The merchant is the only one who can control her." The girl shook her head fiercely from behind Evan, her voice sharp. "Lies. All lies," she said, her accent thick but her meaning crystal clear. The men spread out slowly, trying to block any escape. Evan's mind raced. Fighting 3 armed men was suicide, but letting them take her would mean giving her back to a life worse than death. The lead man stepped closer. "You think you're saving her," he said, "but you're only delaying what will happen. She is property, not a person." That word, property, made Evan's blood boil without warning. One of the men lunged forward, swinging the butt of his rifle at Evan's head. Evan ducked, the strike glancing off his shoulder. Pain shot down his arm, but adrenaline kept him moving. He slammed the stone into the attacker's helmet, the impact sending the man stumbling backward. The girl took the chance to grab a handful of sand and throw it into another man's face. For a moment, chaos filled the canyon. Evan pushed the girl toward a narrow gap in the wall. "Go!" he shouted. She slipped through, her small frame fitting easily. Evan followed, but the tall man caught his arm, pulling him back. The grip was like iron. "You'll regret this," the man hissed. Evan twisted hard, breaking free, and dove into the gap. The passage was tight, scraping his shoulders, but it opened into a hidden tunnel. Inside, the air was damp and cool. The girl waited for him a few steps ahead, holding the crystal in her hand. Its glow lit the rough walls, revealing Markings carved into the stone. She pointed at them, her voice quiet. Old way. Safe. Maybe. Evan didn't like the maybe, but it was better than turning back. They followed the tunnel until it sloped upward, the faint light of the moon appearing ahead. When they emerged, they were on a high ridge overlooking the desert. From here, Evan could see the merchant's wagon far in the distance, its glowing cargo stacked high, moving slowly across the dunes toward some unknown city. The sight made his jaw tighten. "That's where we're going, isn't it?" he asked. The girl nodded reluctantly. "Need." "Stop him," she said, her eyes hard with determination. Evan didn't know how they would do it, but one thing was certain. The merchant had lied, and whatever he planned for her, Evan was going to make sure it never happened. Asterisk. The ridge was steep on both sides, and the wind was stronger up here. Grains of sand stung Evan's face as he looked down at the desert below. The merchant's wagon was a small, glowing shape in the distance, moving slowly toward a faraway city between them, and it lay endless waves of dunes, shifting and alive under the moonlight. The girl stood beside him, clutching her crystal, her silver-toned hair blowing in the wind. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, sharp and unblinking. Evan could see she wasn't just running anymore. She was planning. She wanted to stop the merchant, no matter the risk. They climbed down the ridge carefully, their boots and bare feet sliding on loose stones. At the base, they crossed a stretch of flat sand until they reached a cluster of broken metal wrecks. It looked like the remains of old desert skimmer bikes, long abandoned and half buried by time. Evan knelt beside one, brushing off the sand from its control panel. The girl crouched next to him, watching closely. "This one. Maybe work," she said, her English halting but clear enough. Evan pulled open a side compartment, finding wires and an empty power slot. The girl held up her crystal, its glow steady. Evan's eyes widened. "You're going to use that?" She nodded without hesitation. The crystal slid perfectly into the slot, and the bike's lights flickered weakly. A low hum rose from its engine, but it was uneven. Evan climbed onto the seat, motioning for her to get on behind him. The moment she did, the bike wobbled under their combined weight. He twisted the throttle, and with a loud cough, the skimmer lifted slightly above the sand. It was far from stable, but it was better than walking. They shot forward into the night, the dunes blurring under them. The wind roared in Evan's ears. The girl's arms wrapped tightly around his waist, her grip strong despite her small frame. He kept his eyes on the glowing wagon ahead, weaving the skimmer around dips and rises. In the sand for a few minutes, there was nothing but the rush of air and the hum of the bike. Then a sharp flash lit the sky behind them. Evan glanced over his shoulder. A sand cruiser was on their trail. Its engine growled like a beast, and it carried a mounted light that cut through the darkness. The merchant's men had found them. "Hold on!" Evan shouted over the wind. The girl looked back and saw the cruiser gaining fast. She reached into her belt pouch and pulled out one of the small metal spheres from the watchtower. With a quick flick, she threw it behind them. It hit the sand and exploded in a burst of light and noise. The cruiser swerved sharply, its lights scattering over the dunes. But it didn't stop. It recovered and pushed forward even faster. Laser fire sliced through the night, scorching the sand near the skimmer's path. Evan gritted his teeth and leaned into the controls. The skimmer's engine whined in protest, the old frame rattling under the strain. They sped down a steep dune, the bike nearly tipping at the bottom. Ahead, the desert floor flattened into a salt plain. Smooth and fast, Evan pushed the throttle as far as it would go. The wind was almost enough to knock him back. The girl pointed toward the right, where jagged rock spires rose from the desert like frozen flames. Evan understood. Cover. They veered toward the rocks just as another blast from the cruiser struck behind them. The heat of it washed over Evan's back. They darted between two towering spires, the skimmer barely fitting through the gap. The cruiser tried to follow but had to slow down to avoid crashing. Evan used the chance to zigzag deeper into the rock field. The shadows here were thick, the moonlight broken into narrow beams. It was harder to see, but that also meant it was harder to be seen. The girl leaned forward, whispering, "Hide." "Then move." Evan spotted a hollow in the side of a tall spire, just big enough for the skimmer. He guided them in, cutting the engine. The silence was sudden, almost deafening after the roar of the chase. They waited, the only sound their breathing. The light from the cruiser swept past once. Then again, after a long moment, it faded into the distance. Evan let out a slow breath of relief. The girl gave him a small nod, but her eyes told him it wasn't over yet. They stayed hidden until the sound of engines was gone. Then Evan started the skimmer again. The crystal still glowing steadily, they moved slower now, weaving through the rocks until the desert opened ahead of them again. The wagon was closer now, its lights clear in the dark. Evan could see 2 guards sitting at the back, scanning the dunes with long rifles. The girl leaned close and whispered, "Need." "Surprise." "Fast." Evan glanced at her and nodded. He didn't know exactly what she had in mind, but he trusted her, and that trust was about to be tested. The skimmer's engine sputtered once, twice. Evan frowned. The old machine was reaching its limit. The girl noticed too, her grip tightening. "We close." "Push," she said, her tone fierce. Evan angled the skimmer toward the wagon side. Closing the distance quickly, the guards shouted, raising their rifles. The girl pulled the crystal from the skimmer's slot. The bike immediately began to drop toward the sand. "Jump!" she yelled. They leapt together, hitting the sand hard, rolling to absorb the impact. The skimmer crashed behind them, kicking up a cloud of dust. The guards fired, but the cloud blinded their aim. Evan and the girl ran low to the ground, using the wagon's own shadow as cover. They reached its rear wheels, the massive lizard-like creatures pulling it, barely slowing. The girl glanced at Evan, her eyes hard. "This time, we take it," she said asterisk. The wagon's massive wheels groaned as it rolled across the uneven dunes. Evan and the girl moved quietly along its shadow, their bodies low to avoid being seen. The smell of the lizard-like creatures pulling it was strong, a mix of hot scales and desert dust. Above them, the guards scanned the darkness with their rifles. Unaware of the 2 figures creeping closer, the girl touched Evan's arm, her glowing eyes locking with his. She whispered one word in a sharp, steady tone. "Now." Evan grabbed the edge of the wagon and pulled himself up. His boots found a gap between the stacked crates. He climbed silently, using the shadows to stay hidden. The girl followed, moving with a quiet grace that made her almost invisible in the dim moonlight. When they reached the top, Evan froze. The crates around them were filled with strange goods, glowing stones, metal orbs, and sealed containers that pulsed faintly. With blue light, it felt less like cargo and more like something dangerous waiting to be used. The girl moved to a round metal hatch at the center of the wagon's floor. She placed her hand on it, and it slid open with a hiss. Evan peered inside. The space below was larger than he expected, and in the middle of it sat the merchant. He was tall and thin, his 4 arms busy checking a panel covered in blinking lights. His long face twisted into a smile when he saw them. "So," he said in a deep voice, "my lost cargo returns." The girl's expression hardened, her voice shaking with anger. "No." "I free," she said, her English still broken but her meaning sharp. The merchant chuckled. "You think you can leave me? You are worth more than the rest of this wagon combined. You are my fortune." Evan dropped down into the compartment, landing between the merchant and the girl. "Not anymore," he said, his voice low. The merchant's smile faded, his 4 arms spreading in a way that made him look larger. 2 of his hands reached for weapons on his belt. The other 2 grabbed the control lever. Evan didn't know what it was for, but he knew it couldn't be good. Before the merchant could act, the girl leapt forward. She pulled the crystal from her clothing and slammed it into the control panel. The lights flickered wildly, and the whole wagon shook. Outside, the lizard creatures roared in confusion, their pace breaking. The guards shouted, their boots thudding. On the roof above, the merchant snarled, lunging for the girl. Evan intercepted him, grabbing one of his arms and twisting hard. The alien's strength was inhuman, and Evan struggled to hold him back. Suddenly, a deafening screech cut through the chaos. The wagon shuddered as something massive slammed into its side. Evan's blood ran cold. The hunter creature, Seraph, had found them. Its pale bone-like head crashed through part of the wall, snapping. At anything it could reach, the merchant roared in frustration. "Kill it! Protect the cargo!" He shouted to his guards, but the creature ignored the guards completely. Its black eyes locked on the girl. Evan realized with a jolt, it wasn't after food. It was after her. The girl stood her ground. Her crystal glowed brighter than ever, casting a beam of light across the cramped space. The creature recoiled slightly, hissing. The merchant took advantage of the moment to shove Evan back, but Evan didn't fall. Instead, he grabbed a heavy metal bar from the floor and swung it. The hit connected with one of the merchant's arms, making him drop his weapon. The girl shouted something in her own language. Evan didn't understand the words, but he heard the urgency. She tossed the crystal to him. For a heartbeat, Evan hesitated, unsure what to do. Then instinct took over. He turned toward the canyon they were approaching and slammed the crystal into a glowing slot near the wall. The floor panels lit up. With a sudden burst of power, the wagon's walls shifted, metal plates sliding into place as if preparing for something. The merchant screamed, realizing too late what was happening. Evan pulled the lever the merchant had been guarding earlier. With a grinding roar, part of the wagon's side opened. The force of the movement threw the merchant off balance. Hunter lunged inside, its teeth snapping inches from the merchant's face. Evan grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her toward the opening. They leapt out into the night air, landing hard in the sand as the wagon shook behind them. The merchant's voice turned into a scream, then was swallowed by the beast's roar. Evan didn't look back. The girl pulled him to his feet, and together, they ran into the dunes. Behind them, the wagon collapsed under the hunter's weight. They didn't stop until the sound of battle was far behind. The first light of dawn began to touch the desert, painting the sky in soft gold. Evan turned to look at the girl. She was breathing hard, but her eyes were bright. "You saved me." "Now I save you," she said softly. Before he could ask what she meant, she held the crystal in both hands. It pulsed with light, and a thin beam shot upward into the sky. A moment later, a small craft descended silently from the clouds. The ramp lowered, and warm light spilled onto the sand. The girl stepped forward, then paused and looked back at him. "Come," she said simply. Evan hesitated for a moment, looking at the endless desert behind them. Then he followed her up the ramp. The door closed, the hum of the engines growing louder. Through the small window, Evan watched the desert shrink beneath them, and for the first time since this began, he allowed himself to breathe. Asterisk.